Hi everyone, it's Kurt here again. Time for another video. This time we're looking at Chapter 5 on standardized testing. Again, our material comes from the textbook by Brown and Abby Wickrama. Alright, so let's get started. This video won't be too long. What we're looking at here today is just specifically looking at standardized testing. So last unit, we looked at standards-based assessment, and now we're going to look at standardized testing. Now, there's a few key points to make here. First of all, as a classroom teacher, and I think I mentioned this later on my slides, you're not going to be using standardized tests a lot in your classroom, and it's unlikely that you're ever going to design one on your own. However, it's still important that you know about standardized testing because you may actually use some of them. You may prepare your students for them. You may take some of the items and use them for your own classroom. So I think the actual idea of them is really, really important. All right, so learning objectives for this chapter. There are 5. The first is you should consider the link between standards-based assessment and standardized testing. The second one is to try to apply the knowledge of the pros and cons of standardized testing so that you can evaluate and adapt standardized tests on your own. Okay, the third is to actually know what are the steps to develop a standardized test, and then learn how to perform construct validation. Remember, we talked about constructs in earlier chapters, which are basically like we're going to measure English proficiency. That's a construct. So how can these huge test makers like GEPT, TOEFL, and all of those, how can they validate or say that their tests actually measure what they're saying it's going to measure? Okay, and the last one is we're just going to kind of have a look at constructs from different standardized language proficiency tests. And actually, I'm going to cover just a few examples. Like I always say, if you want to know more, to really fully understand, make sure you read the chapter in detail because all of the information is there. Remember, these videos are just to share with you what I think are some key terms, key concepts, and try to explain them using my own words. Okay, so let's start with the characteristics of a standardized test. So of course they're standards-based. They are tests that are designed based on a set of standards, just like we talked about in class, like the entrance exams that we use in Taiwan. They should be based on a set of standards, and we looked at the standards as well in class. Whether there's a direct link or not, I don't know. I've never actually evaluated it, but in theory, that's the way it's supposed to be. Okay, now, a standardized test should be created through extensive research and development. So these tests are not just randomly written by people. They're based off of studies that people have done to try to prove that the items that they use, the subjects that they use, the scoring that they use are all based on actual theory, and that theory has been tested by many, many, many people in different countries to prove, as best they can, nothing is 100%, that they actually measure what they're supposed to measure, that they're effective, that they show what students are able to do, that they are effective for placing students in groups. So this is not something that just one random teacher can do on their own, of course. This takes years of practice and research, and they usually have some kind of administration that will work together to do this. Okay, they have systematic scoring and administration procedures, so everything is very clearly ordered, written down, and structured. And then they utilize norm-referenced assessment. So if you remember what that is, a norm-referenced assessment is when your score is put into a certain group or a certain standard. So if you want to say that you have a C1 English proficiency, then you need to meet certain standards, or you have to get a certain score on an exam, and they will put you in that group. It's not just based on your percentage that you got correct. Okay, so let's look at some examples here. The book talks about TOEFL, IELTS, SAT, GRE, GMAT, LSAT, MELAB, PTE, and so on. If you want to know what they are, go look them up. But the point is not to look at each one specifically today. It's more to talk about them as a group, because these are the common standardized tests. Now, why are they standardized? Is first of all because they specify a set of competencies or standards for a given domain. Second, they utilize construct validation. So I mentioned this before. These have been validated by groups of people through research to show that they actually measure what they're supposed to measure. And the third one is they design a set of tasks to measure the aforementioned competencies. So what are the competencies that you're supposed to be able to reach or perform or learn? And then, so let me go back. So for example, if it's an English proficiency standardized test, and I want to know what your proficiency level is. So for example, GEPT, they're supposed to specify exactly what competencies or standards that you are supposed to be able to meet on each of those tests. And then the tasks must measure those competencies. So for example, the listening and reading test, everything in there is tested and researched to make sure that those items actually measure your listening and reading skills. And which skills do they measure? So is it listening comprehension? Is it listening for vocabulary? And so on. Now, one of the misnomers, misconceptions, something that people get wrong is that they just automatically believe standardized tests equal tests with predetermined answers like multiple choice or true false. But that's actually not true. And I think a lot of you know that because you've taken these exams. The speaking, the writing, those are not predetermined answers, right? There are some open-ended answers as well, which are much more difficult to assess as a test item writer, because there isn't just one correct answer. Okay, so what are the advantages of standardized tests? So first of all, it can provide a ready-made, validated test for teachers to use. Can save enormous amounts of time. So like one time I wanted to give my students an English proficiency test just to show them what their levels were at. Boom, I can use the GEPT test. It's already done. Here we go. Let's use it. Okay, administration of the test is usually simple and can be completed in a reasonable amount of time. Everything's already designed for you. The teacher doesn't need to actually come up with anything. And scoring procedures are typically streamlined. I mean, if you work for one of those language testing companies, usually they have the card reading machine. You put it in and boom, it's scored for you right away. Okay, even if it's for speaking and writing, there's training that they give as well so that you can know how to give the right score, and they have very clear specifications or rubrics that are very detailed to show where the scores will be. Okay, but there are many disadvantages as well. First of all is that people blindly assume that all the items are valid and reliable, which is not always the case. You still have to be critical of the items inside. And I think maybe you have an idea of that when I showed you those test items in class. I know those were not standardized test items. Actually, one was the GEPT Kids one. So just because they've been tested and approved doesn't mean all the items are really valid. Now, the second one is that these tests can be used inappropriately by teachers. So I need to give my students a test. I need to place a student into the right class, or I need to assess their appropriateness for this bilingual program, or whatever the situation is. I don't have a test for them. Here, let me give them GPT. but does that actually match the purpose that you're testing them? You have to make sure that you use these tests for their real purpose. Okay, so for example, if you use a proficiency test for an achievement test, that's not valid. That's not what they were designed for. Some standardized tests utilize indirect testing. So actually, as a teacher, you have to understand this. In the past, these big exams like TOEFL and TOEIC and IELTS, they never used to have production. It used to be that they were just listening and reading, because there's a lot of research done that says if your receptive skills are strong, there should be a strong correlation to your productive skills. And so if you're a really good reader, probably you're a good writer. Now, there were a lot of studies to prove that. However, that's not directly testing the skill. And so you need to understand that when you're giving a test. Are you required, or should you ethically directly test the skill? Now, there's a lot of issues here, because it could be practicality issues. Like, you want to test your students speaking, but you have 50 students in the class. So are you going to interview 50 students in order to see their speaking skills? That's tough. It's the best way, but maybe not. So some teachers will give a paper and pencil test based on speaking output, where students have to choose the correct answer, they have to choose the right grammar that would be used, the right response. It's not directly testing, but it is indirectly testing speaking. So you have to be careful that you understand what's going on with the test. And is that standardized test testing directly or indirectly? And which way do you want to go? Okay. And the last one, which I think is the most important, is that people assume that standardized tests assess all people equally. And that's just simply not true. There are a lot of people who do badly on these kind of exams, but that doesn't mean that they're bad at English. They may have a hard time with tests. They may have test anxiety. It may be that the test is so inauthentic they can't really bring out their creative skills. There's a lot of different things here. It could be that maybe their academic vocabulary is not strong enough, but actually they're really, really good speakers. So there's a lot of different reasons why it could be unfair. It could be culturally biased. It could be test bias. There's so many things. But just because a person doesn't do well on the exam doesn't mean that their proficiency is low. Usually it does, but not always. Okay, so now we're going to move on to developing a standardized test. So as I mentioned, you may never design one in your life. I never have, and probably you won't either. But probably one day you will use one. You'll maybe design items, you'll adapt items from these tests, you use standards for assessment, and so on. So it's really important that you understand the process of how they're designed. And I think you'll find that the way they design these tests is very similar to how you design your own classroom test, at least how we talked about in chapter 3, I think it was. Okay, so some questions that always need to be asked before you do your test. Now for standardized tests, maybe there's a few more questions, so I'll quickly go through them. So how are standardized tests developed? Where do test tasks and items even come from? How are the items evaluated? Who chooses and organizes the items in the test? How do these items reach consequential validity? How are different types of tests created to be of equal difficulty? Who sets the norms and the cutoff limits? Are security and confidentiality an issue? And are cultural and racial biases an issue? Okay, so let's try to go through some material and maybe get some answers to these questions. So step 1 in designing a standardized test is you have to determine the purpose and objectives of the test. So see, it looks very familiar to our classroom tests. So here's 2 examples of commonly known tests and their purposes. So TOEFL, IELTS, PTE, Academic, and MELAB, they are designed to evaluate the general English ability of people who do not speak English as a native language. So English is not their L1. which is why they're common. Some of them are commonly used here. Okay, they're used all over the world as English proficiency tests. That's their purpose. Now, the book gives another example of one from San Francisco State University. It's the CMSPT. This is designed to place already admitted students into an appropriate course of academic writing. So this is a placement test with a secondary goal of placing students into grammar editing courses. Now, even in Taiwan, we have these type of tests for, I wouldn't call them standardized though, but they use these for placing students into bilingual programs and other such classes. I've heard of a few schools that do this. Okay, step 2, design your test specifications. Okay, so same thing, but before the test specs can be designed, the constructs to be assessed need to be identified. So if you go back to step 1, what's the purpose? And then what are the constructs that you're going to assess? So construct validation is typically carried out by a professional administration, which might include university faculty, linguists, and probably assessment specialists as well. So what are the constructs? So we start broadly, okay? We're testing English proficiency, but not just English proficiency. We're testing speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Okay, so within those skills, then what are the skills or what are the pieces of the language that we're going to assess? So if you look down below, we can break the skills further into this continuum of linguistic units, right? So we can start with the phonology. So probably at very, very basic levels, we start there. And then we go to orthography, which is like your spelling. And then we move to the word level, sentence level, discourse level, and then we can even get into the pragmatic level where we deal with social linguistic rules and such, speech acts, how to use the language for specific functions. And so each of those 4 skills, we need to decide, okay, so which levels are we going to start at? Are we going to start at the word level, or do we need to start even higher than that, like discourse level, depending on the test and the purpose? So once you decide all of that, then you can design your test specs. Okay, so how does TOEFL incorporate all of these possibilities? Okay, so here's an example of how TOEFL would do it. So for oral production, they may test overall conversational fluency. They may test pronunciation of a particular component of phonology. They can be tested, these previous 2 can be tested using imitation, structured response, or free response. So if you think back to if you took the beginning level GEPT speaking test, that's what they did, right? They read sentences, you had to listen to it and repeat it. That was the speaking test in the beginning, just imitating what you heard. Okay, then for listening comprehension, you can concentrate on a particular feature of language. You can test overall listening for general meaning. For reading, you can test comprehension of a long or short passage, single sentences, phrases, words. For writing tests, it could be open-ended with free composition, or it can be structured to elicit anything from spelling to discourse level competence. And so all of these things could be chosen, and then of course they need to be ordered, right? So in terms of test specifications, once you choose your language components and the delivery method, then you make your test spec. So here's an example of the test specifications for the TOEFL IBT academic listening skills. Okay, so you can see all the information they have in here. They've got listening section description. So the listening material includes academic lectures and conversations in which the speech sounds natural. You can take notes on listening material throughout the test. The listening section measures your ability to understand spoken English. This is a construct. In academic settings, you must be able to listen to lectures and conversations. Purposes of academic listening: listening for comprehension, listening for pragmatic understanding, connecting and synthesizing information. So you can see this is nothing to do with the test items per se. These are the test specifications talking about what's going to be inside the test. Remember, this is like the blueprint that test designers are going to use and also test takers can use to prepare themselves. Okay, so then step 3 is to design, select, and arrange test tasks. It's a tongue twister, or items. So the test specs are used as a blueprint in choosing test types and the number needed. Okay, so we have our test specifications, and then we decide, okay, so now what are the tasks we're going to do, and then what type of items are we going to use, and how many are we going to use, and you use all that information to start actually making your items. So here's another example. This is an IELTS sample reading test, and I'll let you pause and go through it on your own, but you can see it talks about the reading passage, which is 754 words long, and it's on an article, Making Time for Science, and it's about chronobiology, which is the study of circadian rhythm, sleep, and dietary needs, okay, and blah, 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 and on and on. And then questions 1 to 7 are true, false, okay, and then they give a couple sample questions there, and then 8 to 13 are multiple choice, and they have a couple sample questions, okay. So this is what test specifications will look like. So then after this is drawn up or written down, then the items are written to test the skills that are applicable to the test. So comprehension, inference, and implication. And all items must be tested by a sample audience before they're published. And I mentioned in chapter 3, when we talked about designing your own test items, that you also need to test yours. Now, probably you won't give it to your students first, but you can take the test yourself, or you can ask a coworker to take your test to make sure that your items are okay. And that's what happens with these as well. Okay, then step 4, make appropriate evaluations of different kinds of items. Now, I talked about this one as well, item facility, item discrimination, and distractor analysis in previous chapters. And I said that as a teacher, remember, you could count the number of correct answers and incorrect answers, and you can evaluate your items that way. But that's just for your own personal, not personal knowledge, but just for, evaluating your own test. Whether you get statistical or not, that's up to you. But in terms of a standardized test, these indices are essential. They must be done, and they actually have to meet a certain criteria level, or else they'll be rejected. And for standardized tests, practicality and reliability are prominent. Those reliability will be tested, and each item will be tested. And if it doesn't get a high enough number, it will be rejected. And practicality as well. Now, practicality also comes in the form of giving the test, taking the test, making the test items. Everything needs to come into account here. Okay. So step 5 then is to specify your scoring procedures and reporting formats. So see, it's very similar to classroom tests. So the items on the test should be able to be scored accurately in an efficient, timely manner. So they need to actually be designed and explained in a way that anyone who's assessing the test should be able to give a reliable score. This is for those open-ended items, because obviously the multiple choice items, there's only one correct answer. But how about writing? And how about speaking? And it needs to be in a way that reports back to the students so they know where they're at. Remember, this is an English proficiency test, or it's a placement test. So when I get my score, what does it mean? Where does that put me? So I'm going to give 3 examples of the scoring descriptions from the MELAB. Now, in your textbook, they have lots, but I just chose 3 to show you how very detailed they are. So a score of 97, topic is richly and fully developed. Okay, and then you can read the very detailed description here on your own. Okay, second is a score of 73. Topic is developed clearly, but not completely and without acknowledging its complexity. And then there's a lot of different descriptions in there. And then the very lowest one that they show in the book is 53. So extremely short, usually about 40 words or less, communicates nothing, and is often copied directly from the prompt. So basically, someone that gives this type of response means that they're not able to write in English, and they just copied the prompt again and maybe added a couple of words. Okay, step 6 is to perform ongoing construct validation studies. So I mentioned in the beginning that you should learn about construct validation. But all I want to say about that is when these standardized tests are designed and they want to test the validity of their constructs that they're assessing, is actually a consistent and ongoing evaluation. And it has to happen in order to validate the constructs that are defined. How's this done? Actual research studies are carried out to prove that test items and designs really measure the constructs that they say they're measuring. And this is done by academics and people who are qualified. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do your own informal research on your own tests. You don't need to validate the standardized tests. It's already been done. Now, you can critically look at the items and you can do like me and find some that you feel are not very good. That's what you should do before you give them to your students. But for your own classroom test, you can do it too by giving the test to your students and then going back and evaluating your items. And do that over multiple tests that you give. And you'll start to see which type of items are good and bad. Like, for example, if you design your own tests and maybe you have true, false, and you have multiple choice and you have, open-ended answers. And you find that over 3 exam sessions, the average score on your true false questions is 95%, but your multiple choice is only 55%. Then you should know that something's wrong with your test design because the 2 sections are so different. And therefore, you need to go in and make some changes. So you should do this type of evaluation every time you give a test, and that way you can make sure that your items are as strong as they should be. And I think it's also worthwhile to go back and look at some standardized tests just to kind of refresh your memory of what types of items and what types of skills that they will assess. All right, everybody, that is it for this session. I hope you are all doing very well. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.